Oh my god, Robcore, man, let me tell you something. Man, son, I ain't even angry, I'm just that excited. Oh my god, man, I'm so excited. Dude, man, I wish y'all could see me right now, man. The story, man. Like, dude, the ending to this. Let me tell you something, man. Thawn. Man, Thawn. Thawn is one of my favorite villains of all time. One of the best villains that there's ever been in the history of like any comic book publication ever. He's got so much character. He's got so much pizzazz. He's got so much of that stuff that's just like, oh man, if I could be a bad guy, I'd be him. That's pretty messed up. But this follows the whole idea of the butt, right? Like this is just the epilogue to the button leading into a new story, Running Scared. But God in heaven, if this is not just freaking amazing. Joshua Williamson, man, let me tell you something right now, man. If God was writing the Flash right now, this is what it would look like right now. This is just an amazing story. All right, let's calm down. Let's calm down because we spent like a minute saying pretty much nothing. Let's calm down. Let's relax. So the cool thing about this is that this initially picks up in the 25th century, right? Well, at least it does to a degree. And we get this sort of back and forth thing. Now, in terms of like jumping between like explanations or jumping between points in time, this only really happens twice. It only really happens this time and one other time. But it's designed to mimic the nature of Thawn, and we'll get to that here in a second. But jumping back, I mean, what this really just kind of does is it actually changes things. It turns them on its head because it goes through this whole legacy of all the different Flashes that have ever existed. For example, the Godspeed uniform is there, which basically tells us that following the introduction of the Speed Force storm across Central City and Godspeed gaining his powers, that the future was retroactively affected by what it is that took place in the past, resulting in Godspeed and being introduced to the whole idea of the Flash mythos. But it shows us all these different iterations. Barry Allen, Wally West, the classic Wally West, the New 52 Wally West, all these different versions. But the huge difference here is that we're basically told about the character of Thawn, and that instead of the two of them being enemies, the two of them are actually allies, or at least that's the story that's being given to us. Now this is cool because remember, Thawn is a guy that was obsessed with the concept of Barry Allen. He was obsessed with the idea of the Flash. He was never connected to him. He wasn't part of the family line or anything like that. He was just a guy in the future who was obsessed with the idea of the Flash. He basically had surgery done to make himself look like Barry Allen. He gave himself Speed 4 powers. He went into the past with the intention of meeting Barry, only to basically lose his way when he arrived due to the effects of time travel, and then going through and looking at the Flash's museum, coming to the realization that he was destined to be the Flash's most notable enemy. He had a psychotic break, and the two of them became two of the most popular foes to have ever existed in comic books. And so what we do is we follow up with this little bit of a intro here with the present day, picking up with the idea of Barry Allen. Now, what Joshua Williamson does here is actually pretty genius because we know that Thawn simply can't die. Thawn is effectively immortal for one of two reasons. The first is the reason as it's explained here, and the second is the nature of Thawn, which we'll talk about as we get, as we get further into this video. But with regards to this little segment here, what Barry Allen basically says is that whoever it was that quote unquote destroyed Thawn didn't actually destroy him. Instead, they basically slowed down his connection to the Speed Force, or the negative Speed Force in his case, and ultimately it basically slowed down his healing factor, but his body's still recovering. And that's the cool thing about this, because remember, when it comes to speedsters, so long as they're connected to the Speed Force, their body will heal. And so in the case of Thawn, because he's so powerful, because he's the only person that draws on the negative Speed Force, this sort of antithesis to the Speed Force proper, then what it means is that all that energy basically flows directly into him, and he doesn't really have to share it with anybody. So it's like if Barry Allen was the only Flash that existed, the Speed Force would flow entirely into him and nobody else. Again, this is kind of a necessary thing because if the Speed Force were a battery, then it's like having a battery that a phone's charging off of and a radio's charging off of and a multitude of other things. The more things you have hooked up to that battery, the faster you're going to drain its life. The Speed Force is the exact same way. And so with regards to this whole idea of Thawn, what it means is that despite him having been, quote unquote killed, or at least presumed to have been killed by Dr. Manhattan, he was really more just like incinerated, but his body physically survived. And so because his body physically survived, he will simply just heal. Now this tells us that in order for Thawn to be destroyed in any one particular place in time, you'd have to totally incinerate his body. But The fact remains, Eobard Thawn simply cannot die. And the reason why we get into this is because of the fact that Barry Allen, of course, basically had a birthday party thrown for him by Iris West and the various members of the, the Central City Crime Labs and, or I guess Star Labs and so on and so forth. And it's really just kind of a celebratory thing. But the entire time this is happening, Barry's doing nothing more than just kind of recollecting on the events of the Button. This guy with this weird, funky helmet that Barry never, doesn't know who he is. Of course, we know that's Jay Garrick. And that's the coolest thing, is because when DC launched the New 52, they basically reinvigorated Earth 2, this alternate reality where the golden age of superheroes resided. And the reason why that matters is because in classic DC, Earth 2 was eliminated after Crisis on Infinite Earths and eventually came back during Infinite Crisis. Jay Garrick was like Old Man Flash, right? Like he was just this older guy who just ran not nearly as fast as Barry Allen, but he ran pretty fast, that he brought a kind of wisdom and a kind of hope to the Flash family that really wasn't available from anybody else, just because he'd been the Flash in his own universe for so incredibly long. And humanity really kind of viewed that reality's version of superheroes a little different than they did in the main DC universe. If you were to look, for example, at like an Alex Ross rendering of Jay Garrick, if you feel some kind of surge of hope or kind of this feeling of nostalgia or something along those lines, that's what DC was always trying to put forward when it came to the character of Jay Garrick, whether it was in the nature of the stories that were being told, the way that he was drawn, the events as they were unfolding. Whenever it is that Jay Garrick showed up, sure, he wouldn't be able to defeat Eobard Thawn, but the hope that he brought with him, the nostalgia, the kind of reinvigoration, the hey, we can pull this off, that kind of feeling was always like the little bit of an extra boost that like Barry or Wally or somebody needed in order to basically take on or take out whatever villain they were facing off against. So it was really kind of a cool thing. That's why I always loved him as Old Man Flash, because he's just kind of this great, this great bit of invigoration here. But remember, during the events of DC Rebirth with the Button, with New 52, Jay Garrick was kind of rebooted, but people didn't really care for him too much. His character was all right, but if they had to choose between like the classic Jay Garrick or the modern Jay Garrick, they would choose the classic Jay Garrick. The modern Jay Garrick wasn't terrible, not by any standard of measurement. It wasn't anything like that. It was just kind of a nostalgia thing for a lot of older readers. And so DC Rebirth was sort of teasing the idea that Jay Garrick is going to come back. And the way that we know this is because by the statements that are made in this particular story, when we read the Button, we were kind of left to believe that maybe Jay Garrick was incinerated. He was being held captive somewhere. He escaped just in the nick of time, or at least was able to get out just in the nick of time to help Barry and Bruce Wayne escape the time stream, and then was yanked back in again. We didn't know if he was killed. We didn't really know what it was that was going on. All we knew was that, much like the classic Wally West, the only way for Jay Garrick to escape his confinement, so to speak, was for Barry Allen to remember who he was and tether him to the main DC universe instead of wherever it was that he was being held. But because Barry couldn't remember who he was, Jay Garrick just kind of went back to whatever stasis pod or, whoever it was that was holding on to him, presumably Dr. Manhattan. But what this tells us is that Jay Garrick's not dead. He was just taken back to wherever he was being held from, which means that Jay Garrick will probably come back somewhere along the line. It's Williamson, it's DC saying, hey guys, look, just because Jay Garrick, showed up for a second and then vanished, doesn't mean he's gone forever. We're not yanking your chain. He's probably going to come back somewhere along the line. And what it does is it really kind of creates this feeling of like, yeah, like we're getting this great combination of the things that we loved and the things that we love now and kind of being merged and brought together into one thing. But the other half of this is that Barry Allen begins to think back on the idea of Eobard Thawn. And this gets into the second half of our discussion on why Eobard Thawn cannot be killed. Remember, Eobard Thawn is, he's part and parcel to time travel. That's just part of who he is. He comes from the 25th century. In the 25th century, on the day that he gave himself powers and the day that he made himself look like Barry Allen and the day he traveled back in time, that's a fixed construct. That's never going to change. It's always going to be that way. I mean, I guess Barry could go into the 21st century and kill Thawn, but the whole idea is the fact that Thawn is running around means that he cannot be stopped from ever becoming the Reverse Flash. That's always going to happen. It's an immutable, concrete aspect of the DC timeline. And because of that, no matter how many times Barry Allen kills Eobard Thawn in the future or in the present or in the past, no matter who does anything to him, it's irrelevant. Eobard Thawn will always pop back up again because he's always running back and forth through time. So it's almost like there's an infinite number of versions of him. There's a version of Eobard Thawn for each particular second in time. So, you kill one this second, the one a second from now will pop back up for whatever reason. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's just this idea that he will never leave. He will always be there. And this is kind of cool because I love the character of Eobard Thawn, and we'll find out how awesome he is as we end up getting, further through this story. But in the middle of this whole birthday party, everything's kind of interrupted by a guy by the name of Danton Black. Now, Danton Black in this story is by no means like a major character, right? Like he's a pretty small time guy. I mean, the whole idea of this is that there's a chick named Sally at this party. She and Danton Black like had a drink, and Danton's just like, we're in love. Like it was, it was this weird scenario. So he literally shows up here, cracks crashes this party just because he's chasing after some girl. Now, the other half of this, and something to keep in mind here, is that the party's also visited by Hal Jordan. And that's a cool thing because Hal Jordan and really the Flash are kind of extremely strong friends in a lot of ways. It's one of the reasons, Barry Allen becoming like a Blue Lantern, different things like that. There's a very rich history between the two characters, both before the New 52 and during the New 52. And so, again, focusing on the idea of Danton Black, his character really goes by the name Multiplex, and he was a guy who gained his powers, at least before the New 52, gained his powers in the same way, or really during the same explosion that ended up merging Ronnie Raymond and Martin Stein into the character of Firestorm. And so the result is that he's like, multiple man Jamie Madrox from Marvel Comics, in the sense that he can make an infinite number of copies of himself. Now, the cool thing about this is that unlike Jamie Madrox, Multiplex is a little more extreme, and it's the extreme nature of his character that makes him so cool, because facing off against Hal Jordan and facing off against the Flash is a pretty difficult task for a lot of people. I mean, one, you're talking about a guy who can move faster than time, faster than death, faster than light in the universe. At the same time, you're talking about Hal Jordan, the greatest of the Green Lanterns, depending on what fan you're talking to, but a guy whose Green Lantern ring can allow him to achieve virtually any feat, which includes creating massive, constructs that can just round up all these versions of Multiplex. And so the idea is to form like this massive swarm. And that's what makes it so cool, because Multiplex coming after Flash and after Hal Jordan is like being attacked by a swarm of bees, each one containing basically the orders of Multiplex himself and operating akin to what it is that he wants to do. And that's what's so cool about this. Now, of course, the other half is New 52 Wally West and Iris West. And the reason why this is cool is because while she's attending the party alongside Wally basically, whisks her home and says, hey, look, there's this huge conflict. You don't really need to be here. You're just an average person. You'll end up getting yourself hurt. But when they get back to Iris's home, they're met by the arrival of Eobard Thawn. And that's why this is so cool, is because this could happen due to any number of factors. It could very well be that it's just some version of Eobard Thawn out there somewhere. It could be that it's Eobard Thawn who basically healed himself. We're not told which one it is. And Eobard Thawn makes no reference to the events of the button, which is to say, he makes no reference to the fact that he was totally obliterated and then returned. So this is presumably some other version of Eobard Thawn from a different point in time that hasn't been affected yet by the events of the button. Because remember, with Eobard Thawn's whole idea of time travel, it gets absolutely bonkers. And so I guess we could say that what passes for the past, which is to say any version of Eobard Thawn that has not ended up at the moment where he gets destroyed by Dr. Manhattan, could appear at any point in time. This simply seems to be one of those. When it comes to Eobard Thawn, it's hard to avoid the idea of time, but it's also easy to minimize the discussion of time. And so DC treats time travel totally different from Marvel Comics, and it can make things absolutely wild, especially when it comes to the idea of Thawn. Trying to keep things simple here, one other thing to keep in mind is that Eobard Thawn remembers everything before the events of Flashpoint. And that's what's so cool about this, is because this entire discussion, this entire conversation he has with the New 52 Wally West is rooted in the idea as if Eobard Thawn had just walked into the New 52 from classic DC. And so he looks around and he's like, I fought a lot of different versions of Barry Allen's proteges. I fought Impulse, I fought Wally West, the classic Wally West Kid Flash. I don't know who you are. And this is interesting because Eobard Thawn puts the New 52 Wally West to task and demonstrating what he can do. Now, he's not doing it in like a mentor capacity, right? He's not like, okay, kid, I'm gonna train you to be a great Flash because I'm a good guy. Let's see what you can do. It's literally just Eobard Thawn testing him by trying to beat the crap out of him. And look at what's happening. I mean, look at this. It's not a contest. And that's what we would expect. Like with the New 52 Wally West, his power's just not there yet. He's just now getting to the point where he can begin harnessing his power in a way that he can get relatively close to controlling it. But he's not Barry Allen, and Eobard Thawn is a chore even for Barry. And so it's night and day. It's not a contest in any form or fashion. Not only that, the other thing you have to remember about Eobard Thawn is that he is cruel and he is ruthless and he's cunning, but he's so charismatic. Like he just pops. That's the coolest thing. That's the best way I can describe him. He's just so cool. Because with Eobard Thawn, it's not a matter of him setting his sights on you and saying, okay, now I'm going to kill you. It doesn't work that way. Eobard Thawn never just targets a person. Eobard Thawn targets you and anyone you've ever met. He goes after your livelihood and the livelihood of everyone you've ever known. He just erases you from existence. And so if he goes through the chronology of your life and he's like, okay, so you were born to your parents. Okay, well, I mean, I guess we can't, you're going to be born, so we're going to go ahead and kill your parents. You also had a really good third grade teacher who helped to make you who you are, so we're going to kill that person. You had a few girlfriends over the course of your high school career, so we're going to kill them. You fell in love and got married when you were in college, so she's dead now. And that's literally what he does. He's just like, we're just going to kill them all. That's what makes Eobard Thawn so crazy, is because it's mind games, it's shadow games, it's every conceivable role, every conceivable task a person can take to obliterate a human being from existence. That's exactly what he will do. And so by the time Eobard Thawn goes to work on it, because to quote Ocean's 11, first he'll kill you and then he'll go to work on you. Once he's done, it'll be like you never existed. No one will have ever known your name. No one will ever see your face. You'll never be there. It'll be like you were just a person that was never there. And that's the craziest thing, is because that's what he does. That's what he attempts to go after. Now, the funny thing about this is Iris West, because remember, this is New 52 Iris West. For reasons that, again, we can only really chalk up to the actions of Dr. Manhattan. We don't really know what it is. Iris West does not remember anything before the New 52, because remember, what DC's been toying with the idea of DC Rebirth is that back in 2011, when the New 52 first launched, that it was okay, here's a reboot, here's new origin stories. These are all brand new lives for all these characters. DC Rebirth came back and said, no, that's not what happened. What happened is Barry Allen went back in time, initiated Flashpoint, tried to fix it, and then after the events of Flashpoint, everybody remembered their lives. All these characters were still there, but then presumably Dr. Manhattan stepped in and said, and now all your minds are wiped. Now, as far as all of you guys know, you're new. Iris West doesn't know Barry Allen, not because of the New 52 reboot, but because of the fact that Dr. Manhattan modified her memory so she would forget. That was the whole idea. That's the whole basis behind DC Rebirth. Now, why Dr. Manhattan, assuming it was him, why he did that, we don't know. We're waiting for presumably Doomsday Clock to tell us, which, man, I'm excited about Doomsday Clock. I'm hyped. Man, I'm so I'm super excited. But these are the things that are kind of being fleshed out. But from Eobard Thawne, his mind wasn't wiped. He remembers everything. He knows everything that's been happening. Now we're kind of left to believe that in the time when he was defeated, after the events of Flashpoint and the time that he reemerged, that's when Dr. Manhattan acted. And so presumably it was, it's almost like Eobard Thawne was in a coma and then everything was changing around him and he woke up after it was changed, remembering the way everything used to be. And so he doesn't really know what Dr. Manhattan did. And if he does, he's not telling anybody. And so it's really kind of interesting here, because from his perspective, Iris West, the way she views herself and the way she views the world, that's not who she is. And so the goal of Eobard Thawne is to grab Iris West, take her to the 25th century and jog her memory, to wake her up. And that's the cool thing here, because Barry Allen shows up to the house, right? Like once the whole battle with Multiplex is done, once it's all said and done, once he has this conversation with Hal Jordan, Hal Jordan says, look, man, do not be afraid of what'll happen. Do not be afraid of the idea that Iris West will leave you if you tell her who you are. Be honest, be open with her when he gets back home to basically make that declaration and say, I, Barry Allen, am the Flash. He ends up being met with Wally West, who's just been totally decimated. And of course, Eobard Thawne left a note inviting Barry to the 25th century, but jumping back to the 25th century proper, the whole idea of Eobard Thawne is to say, I'm going to wake you up. I'm going to awaken you to the way things really are. I'm going to take these memories that are suppressed or whatever the case may be, and I'm going to show you who you really are. And so what seems to be happening, or what seems like it will happen, is that Iris West will remember everything before the New 52. She'll remember everything in classic DC. She'll remember the first time she ever met Barry Allen and fell in love. More so than that, she'll also remember when she married Barry and when Eobard Thawne went back in time and killed her. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. This was amazing. But yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.